So I'm going to talk about Lean Software Factory, which I've presented as applying Lean in the sense of the Toyota way to what we do at Bouygues Telecom, which is to deliver software that runs on set-top boxes and gateways. So let me talk first about the goals. Most of it, they should be familiar with anyone who is doing software or IT in the room, because they sound very classical. But I'd like to pinpoint what they mean for us. So efficiency, the big problem that we have and that we had two years ago is rework, is redoing the same thing over and over, or doing things that by the time it gets deployed, or it's not useful anymore, or the customer doesn't use it, or much more often is simply never deployed. So efficiency means no rework. It also means better quality, just as because the experience that you have as an end user with the box is actually, does this damn thing work or not? And every day, do you get a smile? And the answer is no. So we have work to do. Number two goal is agility, time to market. No reason to make a big discourse here. It's very obvious that in the world of telco, we are making less and less money. We're striving to be innovative, and we need to do this fast. So the goal of the software factory is to support that strategy. And number three, so it's more interesting. We launched this new vision of doing our own boxes and our own software for 3 years ago in 2010. Before that, we were buying end-to-end solution, turnkey solution. So when you start a big project like this, the word of mouth works, and you hire a bunch of very smart people who've heard that, well, there is this new project at Bouygues Telecom, and let's go and participate to that great thing. And after when the project is done, they leave and they go to the next operator who has the next cool box to build. So the question was, how can we build a team and keep the team so that we do this as Toyota, not one shot, but for 10 years or 20 years. So we have a team that will deliver continuous value to the customer month after month. And the key word here is pride. How do you build software pride? How do you make sure that group of around 100 people who develop software feel that they are in the right place to be? How do you make Bouygues Telecom the Google of the box? Haven't found the solution yet, but that's the goal. That's the goal. So what defines a good software product? So for those who have no clue what I'm talking about, this is the box. And what I'm talking is the software that you run on this box. We have some very generic goals. I've been in software for 30 years. So I've been saying the first lines for 30 years. We want to do modular software. We want to do stuff that evolves quickly because the environment is changing all the time. And we want to do open software because, as Michael explained, you have to think product. And if you want to think product, most of the good stuff is outside the company, not inside. So you have to get it inside the box. And therefore, openness is a key feature. So that's very, very straightforward. What is specific to our trade is this embedded software. You saw in the subtitle this embedded software world, and it is very important. We do real-time embedded Linux. So for the geeks in the room, it's different from your traditional IT stuff. It has its own culture, and it has a very tight coupling with the hardware. And the very bad news of hardware in the world of consumer electronics, it doesn't work. You learn about hardware when you're a software engineer. It's the Pentium that most of the time works. But in the world of consumer electronics, it doesn't work because the cycles are incredibly short. People do the silicium before the protocols are standardized. They make bets all the time. They lose off most of their bets. So you get the new, so those are not the internet protocols which are stable, but you get, for instance, IPTV protocols. You get all those stuff, sound, music, all those things, and they don't work. The only way to make a product that delivers the experience is to have software that sort of dances around your hardware limitation. And here, agility takes another meaning. And that will be the conclusion of the talk, but I can tell you this already. It means that you have to be able to fix, recompile, and develop in days, and if possible, hours. When we started, we were 6 months. And we moved on many of these from 6 months to days. So it's not a 20% improvement. It's 50 times improvement. So I'll skip that because I don't have much time. So that was the big plan. It's always fun for me. I like to look back at what I wrote. So this is a very old slide. And I will tell you at the end of the talk what we did and what we didn't do. But that's something that we decided in 2010. We said, OK, let's build this software factory. Let's assemble the people and the tools. we will take 1 year and have to build the box, build the hardware, the middleware, develop everything that goes onto it. We'll deploy, so that actually we did on time. We launched last year in June 18th. And then we will improve, and eventually we will delight the customer with something that's nothing short but a miracle. So I'm not going to talk about that part. I'm going to talk about the two big arrows, which are Lean Software Factory, first year, second year. So what I'm going to talk about started more or less when we had finished the first round of putting the software in place, and those are our attempts to continuously improve for 2 years. So in the Lean Software Factory, there is a word which is Software Factory, which is very important. Actually, it's even more important than the Lean qualificative added to it. So a Software Factory means doing software in a way which is very close to a factory, where the two keywords are building and testing. And there is no reason to spend too much time on this, because it's now well understood and well adopted. The principles are easy, the art is very difficult. But all that I'm going to say is totally impossible if you don't have a software factory first. And I will come back to that later on, but it's a key message. So the first thing we do is we try to develop software in a way which is as automated as possible, from conception and coding, but testing, integration, and delivery. And there is a clear ring to DevOps, which was mentioned this morning. It's the same overall goal. The reason Software Factory is so important is, for me, it's an evolution from the way I was taught software 30 years ago, which is very information technology, very technical point of view. 20 years ago, the stakeholders, the users, were added into the picture, and we stopped talking about IT and we talked about information systems. But it's a static picture. When you talk about factory, you need to see the cycle, the way you produce the software, the way it's used, and how you improve from this. And you discover very quickly something which took me like 20 years to understand, that most of those qualities, openness, agility, the things that you want from your software, they are not a quality of the product, they are quality of the process. And this is why you need to make people before you make products, because actually it's not, it's something which is really part of the big cycle, which is a reason why I'm so excited with this software factory idea. So let me tell you about how I see Agile, Lean, and related topics. And for this, I need to take 2 seconds to give you an idea of who I am. I've had 4 lives. So my current life is I'm doing products innovation. 5 years ago, before that, I was the CIO of Bouygues Telecom. So I've done IT during 5 years. So I'm sort of familiar with some of the IT issues. And then before that, I did 10 years as a scientist working on scheduling. If you Google Yves Caseau, you will see that my claim to fame is not Lean, it's not Bouygues Telecom, it's job shop scheduling. And before that, I had a life as a software developer and software engineering, and I work on software engineering methods, as they were called, and I was lucky to actually know some of the people who wrote the Agile manifesto. So I actually have sort of first-hand knowledge, although very, very old, because Agile is very much an alive movement, and Agile in 2013 has nothing to do with the one I learned. But Agile you can summarize as small teams, small batches, time boxing, co-evolution of code design architecture, which is very important, role of face-to-face communication, and user stories. So that's my own very, very simplified summary of what the original intent was. There are 2 child of the Agile movement which are interesting. Scrum, because as you may have noticed, Scrum is the most popular Agile method today in France, and probably in the world, but clearly in France. Scrum adds to this the importance of visual management, which was sketched in the first Agile paper, but not developed as thoroughly as in the Scrum methods. Practice and rights, which is sort of close from the Lean culture. And reflection, as that was mentioned this morning during the roundtable discussion. Extreme programming is very important to me, and you will see why later on, because I will sort of make a link with what Michael told me 2 years ago. The key thing here is that code is valuable. That Michael told me that when you do Lean for cars, the first important thing is to love cars. And I'm telling my people, my software engineers, if you want to do Lean Software Factory, the first important thing is to love your code. If you don't love your code, all the tools, the methods, all this is junk. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And I think that it was very, very well expressed in the extreme programming movement. And for me, when you have all of this, you have many of the Lean principles, but there are a few which are lacking. The first one is Kanban, and I will come back to Kanban in a few minutes. You will see how close or different it is from what Michael said. Kaizen, because although there is Kaizen in Scrum, it's not the way it's defined in Toyota. And other things, and we need more time, but the importance of taking the customer's point of view and removing whatever is not necessary. So it's not removing waste, it's removing muda in the Lean sense. That's something which is not part of the Agile movement. So why did we look at all of those things as relevant for Bouygues Telecom compared to what I was saying earlier? Clearly, the small batch was a very important transformation principle for us. And I won't go into too much detail, that everybody understands this. The part which is really important for us is the co-design of code architecture and conception, because that's the thing that goes the most strongly against the culture of French large companies. So that's where the biggest change and the most difficulty is. The other thing which is very important for us is the role of face-to-face communication. And again, if you work in a small company, it's not a big issue, but as soon as you work with projects with more than 100 people, this becomes a nightmare and a really key issue. Test-driven development, which I've singled out of extreme programming, for me is very related to the Lean Startup. That is, the reasoning is simple. You need to innovate, so you need to do this very quickly and iterate. And the only way you can work quickly and iterate when you write software if you have automated, otherwise, including the testing. Otherwise, it simply doesn't work. And the other things which I'd like to develop, and I would love to tell you that it's part of our culture, but we are not there yet, is the sustainable pace, which is also a very Toyota principle. We are still working far too much, weekends, nights, and so on, which means that we are exhausted and we are making errors. So we'd like this to change. That's the one is an easy sell to people actually writing code. To continue with this list, I agree very much with what Michael said. Visual management is mostly a tool for the operators to train themselves about what they're trying to do and the problems that they have. And I will come back to that later on. Then everything else is sort of more or less straightforward. To single out why I wanted to add some Lean value to the Lean Software Factory. So for me, Kanban is really a tool to kill one problem is that I have people who wait for one another. And when I made a number of audits, I took people outside Bouygues Telecom who were known in the open source community for writing nice pieces of code, and I sent them to my teams, and they came back saying, well, this is a funny organization. You have lots of people. They are very good, but mostly what they do is wait for one another. And I'll try to tell you how I see Kanban, which is not so different from what you were proposing, as a tool to reduce this, not to solve this, but to reduce this. Kaizen, I will talk later on, and I can move. Okay, so now let me talk about Lean Software Factory. And as I said, it's a transformation. So it assumes that you have the organization in one state, and you want to move to another state. And the 4 practices I'm going to develop are designed to make that shift. I'm assuming that you're not starting from zero. So more precisely, there is this very nice little book by Carl Hibb, which is called The Art of Lean Software Development. And everything that is in the book for me is sort of the common ground that you should deploy before doing anything else. So for me, this is not really my goal of a Lean software organization, but it's common sense. And if you don't do this, then everything that I'm going to talk about doesn't make sense. So yes, you need, it's a good book because it's very, very short and it's very practical. So you need to do your builds automatically, you need to manage your code, you need to do automated testing and so on. And you need to have the key, the core principles of Scrum, that is short iteration and customers on the floor with you. People who will use the software should be part of the development team. So once you have this, then I can tell you about what we want to add to the equation, because that part is more or less where we were 2 years ago. So the first thing is really Kaizen, that is, it's team problem solving. And the word which is very important for us is team, because in a large organization where people are very stressed by time constraints, problems tend to be solved, but they are solved by whoever is there at the right time, and there is not enough the idea that you need to use everybody, all hands on deck all the time. That doesn't happen. So what this first practice says is you're going to do an A3. That's sort of the you will actually put people together in a room, all the stakeholders. You will take the time to find the problem, and then you're probably as much experts in 5 whys as I am. So there is no reason to say too much. The interesting part about this slide, which is, although it's very verbose, is that's the slide that I showed to my staff. And so the part which would be of interest to you is not really what Kaizen is, because you know this. It's more what can I tell to my developers to motivate this practice. The first thing you say is, I have good news, is that there are only 4 slides. Then each slide is sort of kind of painful, but there are only 4. And the why tries to make the link between the practice and the pain points that we have. And clearly the pain point that everybody feels is when you develop embedded software, you have hundreds of problems daily. I mean, they come at an amazing rate. I mean, I was a CIO. When I stopped being a CIO, I said, at least I'm done with shitty jobs where the phone calls like 3 times a day with a problem. It was a breeze compared to what it is to develop a box. There's at least 10 times more problems for an organization that was 10 times smaller. When I was in IT, I had 1,000 people, moved to a few hundreds, and many, many more problems. So you can understand that if you have so many problems, the likelihood of not solving them and simply putting a sparadrap, that's a Band-Aid on the plane, this is very likely. So that's number 1. Number 2 is the project room. And here again, I very much agree with Michael. Visual management, it's not for the managers. It's not a tool to control your project. It's really a place where you will help people understand better what they're doing. So the part which is the number 3, all this A3, all the issues that you have, you put them in a project room. You obviously put the planning and the milestones. And you also put everything that helps understanding the architecture of what you're doing, because that's another key thinking from Toyota is you need to educate everybody on the floor about system thinking. And I can tell you that when you do those type of closed loop systems that we do, the system thinking is hard. So if you don't show it on a room on a wall of the room, it's very likely that actually nobody understands what they're doing. And sort of so now let's come to the Kanban. So the Kanban, as I said, my main goal is to make sure that people will stop waiting for one another. So the first thing you want to obtain is reduce the working process. And so you make a board which is sort of small enough to constrain people not to put too much stuff. But that's sort of just the first step. If you only do this, you don't get much. You get a tiny improvement. The real big question is when people start to think of, I should only do this if the guy who's going to use it is ready for it. And that's really the hard part, the hard thing. So so this is really, you have recognized going from push to pull. And for me, this is the key transformation. Because the main reason we have people waiting is because we have over-eager software producing people from specs to code to test to anything, saying, I've done my job, I don't understand why the guy who's supposed to test it now is not there already doing it. And I made a big audit a year after doing all this. And people were very, very pleased to show me the project room, the Kanban, all the tools, and they were complaining, see, look how well I'm working, but those stupid guys just next to me, they are not as fast as I am. Okay, so I say, okay, not surprisingly, I've only reached 10% improvement of what could be achieved because they've actually missed the most important lesson. So back to the drawing board. And number 4, as I said, and I will take a little more time because I went fast on those 3 things because they are covered throughout the day by people who are even more talented than I am. So, but I haven't heard much about the importance of code quality, so I will slow down a little bit here. 5S, the 5S from Toyota actually applies very well to code writing. This is explained pretty nicely by Mary Popendick in her book, but there are other resources. If you Google, you will find them. You'll find that the sort, systematize, shine, standardize, and sustain, they apply to software in many ways, and it makes perfect sense. That is, if you want to loving your code means organizing it in a very clean and elegant and proper manner so that it's easy to come back to it. It makes maintenance easier, and it makes everything else easier. So what is everything else? Number 2 is discipline, which is mostly standards at the code level, as you mentioned. So part of it, anybody who's done software on large scale know about it. I mean, coding standards is critical. If you have large teams with people who get in and out, if you want to maintain your software over 20 years, if you don't have coding standards, you have simply no chance, and so on. But there is more than this, and I think what you pointed out was very important. That is, a coding standard is not something, a good practice that you get from your quality department. It's something that the team builds by itself, by himself. Well, by itself, it's a team, yeah. And that's a key. First, it brings a lot of quality improvement by itself, and it also allows the next. So it's kind of a Maslow pyramid of proposals here. Number 3 is you do code review. And if the code is not clean, standardized, and so on, code reviews are terrible. And they are pains, and people try to avoid them. So you need to do 1 and 2 so that you can do code reviews. Code reviews, and you put as a key value of the software organization the notion of elegance. So that's something you want to write elegant code. And if you look at all the companies in the Silicon Valley which are successful because they write code, they have a lot of pride in the code that they write. And that's something you need to build. And you build it bottom up and not obviously not top down. You try to remove stuff because this is the right time to remove stuff. So you're back to to HIB less code idea. And last but not least, you develop this culture of gardening the code. The code is not something that moves, that's a live object. Last year, there was this great talk from this lady from Google who explained to us that at Google, 50% of the code is changed monthly. So when you tell this to regular IT organization friends, they just say, this is not possible. And obviously, if you produce code with a terrorist approach, this is not possible. If you don't do code with this type of philosophy and where it's sort of a bottom-up production, there is no way you can refactor your code all the time. And to come back to the point that Michael was making, yes, iterative process produce junk. That is, if you do things iteratively, it doesn't matter if you're very smart and you have only Stanford PhD, you're going to produce junk. So there has to be a process of cleanup and refactoring all the time. You also need architecture. That would be a lesson from the third part. So I should look at my watch to see how I'm doing with time. How much of this was deployed, and how much? So the factory part was deployed. For those IT people in the room, it's always difficult because you have to push tools, you have to install industrial systems, and you have actually some of your smarter people who say, well, I would rather use this open source tool or whatever. But the good news is we managed to convince everybody, and it has saved a lot of effort, and everything else would not be possible without this. So what worked really well, or better than what I was expecting 2 years ago, are the rights from the Scrum methodology, the stand-ups. Stand-ups, they quote easily, they reduce email. They have instant benefits. People do stand-up for a month, and they say, well, actually, this is nicer. It's a nicer way to work. So that was user stories was a very easy way to bridge the gap between marketing and the software organization, and that also caught very quickly. And visual management, as that is the practice of project room, that was easy to deploy. What was harder is this key principle from Lean that is all hands on deck. It's telling your software guy that when he writes a piece of code, he should ask the opinion from the guy who would test it, testing the guy who is doing the integration, that he should call the architect to discuss about this. I mean, this sounds obvious, but I can tell you it's everything but obvious. And when I did my first audit after 1 year, I could see that I had nice agile silos, but trying to make everybody work together is still difficult. Unit testing, that is implementing the philosophy of extreme programming, doing test-driven development and writing tests as early as possible, also difficult. And what is really hard is reflection, obviously, slowing down, and large-scale orchestration, but that brings me directly to the lessons learned. So as was said earlier, both by Michael and by other people, when you're doing a large-scale software integration products, you have all kinds of things to do, and there is nothing like one size fits all. Although the drawing is more complex, it's very similar to Michael's drawing. It says that you have the front-end stuff, which is a lot of agile small teams, and you have the back-end stuff, and it's mostly V-cycle. So you can say, okay, so you have a tale of two worlds. The big difference, or the big sort of the things that we found over 2 years, is that even if you do the big cycle, you can work with a lean approach with all the lean philosophy, both on the system engineering part. You can actually apply a number of those principles in that part of the work, and also at the end when you're doing the system integration, because you're building this lean factory. So it's not a splitted world with two culture, with small agile teams and industrial teams. It's a mixed, the lean software factory is of a mix of culture. And obviously, it requires a little bit of time. So the key lesson learned is that architecture matters, so not very surprising. Especially when you're doing something which is difficult, because you will generate complexity. You will generate complexity because you're not as smart as you wish you were. You will generate complexity because the customer requirements are complex. You will generate complexity because you iterate, and for many reasons. Which means that you need to think a little bit about this process, and there are two things you have to do in parallel. You have to think beforehand and think a little bit about architecture principles and have a long-term vision, and you have to think about architecture while doing the product and retuning your vision constantly. That's probably the biggest difference between a lean software factory organization and a classical software organization, that architecture is not something that you do first and then you let people work. It's something that you do constantly, and the architect is at the service of the guy writing the code. That's probably, in terms of culture, that's the really big difference. Is you go from, I have a really smart guy, he has sort of 10 years or 15 years of experience, and he talks to a junior programmer and says, this is the way you should do things. And you move to, now the junior programmer says, I'm writing this, and here I have a problem. Please, you're an old guy with gray hair. Could you tell me, do you have an idea of how to do things differently? And that's the culture shift that you have to put in place. Another key importance of architecture is systemic thinking and teaching everybody about architecture. So another difference is that architecture is not something that is reserved for a small class of your IT guys. It's a practice that everybody needs to do, including people doing the most quote-unquote mundane job of testing. And so the design review are criticals, and you need to bug your architects so that they do produce what I call well-crafted artifacts. The PowerPoint that only 10 guys in the company can understand, you're done with this. You need to deliver architecture milestone documents that everybody can read, from the CEO to the guy who is running the server in operations. So it turns out that I found a book which more or less says the same thing, and I figured I would give you a few quotes. I don't agree with everything that is in this book, but it makes a nice summary of the key ideas. And the number one is that Lean and Agile, although they share a lot of things at the key and motivation principle level, they're quite different. And this is very close to what Michael said, so I can go very quickly. The key things is you cannot refactor your way into a better architecture. You have to think about it a little earlier. And this is a very pedantic way of saying things, but when you have a large-scale mess, architecture matters more than if you have a small team. So we don't really need Barry Bum to convince us, but this is real science, so it's fun once in a while to quote real science. And there is a wonderful sentence in that book that would deserve a full talk, so I won't go into it, saying, if you really think about what Lean is, which is thinking sustainable development of the company, long-term value creation of a generation, then what it means when you're writing software is thinking about your APIs. And this, I will let you wonder about that sentence. But it's a very, very deep sentence, saying actually the goal of the Lean architect is to have a vision of the set of APIs that obviously you should have in your code, because if you want to write software code, API is application programming interface. Sorry, this is the jargon of the geeks. This is what makes your software usable by other people. I mean, this is what, if you don't have APIs, then you write a software which does what you think it's going to do. If you have APIs, you make a platform, and it will do smart things that somebody else thought that it could actually do. And that's the essence of Facebook, Google, or any smart company success today. So here, what I just want to say, because it's time to conclude, is that it's good to think about kata and practices, but if you don't have the right values, the practices don't work. So I will skip the junk about governance. I will simply tell you a little bit about how what we do as far as values are concerned is we let the software groups self-organize and come up with their own values. And they are not especially original or interesting per se. What's interesting is the process. That means that at the end of the process, people believe that those are their own values. And then you can start doing the katas. Because if you do the katas and you don't have the proper values, then people think it's a painful exercise, and they're very happy to look at their watch and say, well, whenever we can do something else and return to real life, it's the sooner the better. Another key thing that I've learned, much too late, but is the importance of Gemba Walks. And the short summary is you cannot transform an organization if you have no clue what's happening in it. And to be very frank, it's now obvious to me that 2 years ago, I had absolutely no clue what was happening in my software organization. And so that's sort of the number one reason for doing Gemba Walks. Number two is it has sort of two benefits as far from the team perspectives. Eventually, when I get smarter, I will teach them how to self-improve, but I'm not there yet. But what I can tell them is the vision, and what I can tell them is their place within the organization and smooth the collaboration between all those teams. So my key role is to make sure that the true north is shared by everybody, and my second role is to detect that people should talk to another more than they do. So that's the practical value, and on the human side, the value is simply recognition and pride, and then the third benefit is that I'm getting less dumb as I'm doing this. I'm not doing anything smart. I do Gemba. Michael told me a few things, and I'm doing half of what I should do, but it works, and my plan is to improve, to learn, and I think after one more year, I'll do a better job there. So to conclude, and I won't. This Lean Software Factory, it's a collection of best practices plus a spirit, and that's what's important, and it really works. The key message, and that was said by Dajos very, very eloquently, is that terrorism doesn't work. In our current world, when you're building products, you have to change. You have to focus on skills. And just to conclude with this, values are very important. I mean, they are, you say, okay, what matters is continuous improvement and growing people. Fine. To do this, you have to learn by doing, so you will do kata, you will practice very well. If you don't have the right values, you can't start. You have all the right slides and tools and the right ideas, but you fail to start. So you have to build the values to start the journey. And I will stop there.